Our next test. Our next speaker tonight is no strange face to television and no strange name to the field of ufology. George Knapp, an investigative reporter with CBS, in the end of 2005, co-authored a book called The Hunt for the Skinwalker. I'm eagerly awaiting his talk because this is about an area in Utah that has experienced so much paranormal activity, from UFO sightings to Bigfoot. They authored a very successful book called The Hunt for the Skinwalker, and here to talk about it is Mr. George Knapp.
Thanks. Just want to warn you that I'm wearing new shoes. I haven't worn them before, and I know I'm going to slide off on my ass here before this is over. So if it happens, that's the cause. I'm really happy to be invited back to the MUFON Symposium. I mean, after all, this is the big one, the most credible of all the conferences. It's been a while for me, and really happy to see some old friends. Also great to be here in Denver. That was sort of like an extraterrestrial event there this afternoon. What'd you call that stuff? That was rain? Yeah. I've read about it, I've seen it in movies, but since I live in the Mojave Desert, we don't see a whole heck of a lot of that stuff. It's about as rare, I guess, as like angel hair falling from a UFO. You know, I had something in my mind tonight about what I was going to speak about in addition to the Skinwalker stuff. Some of the MUFON folks got a chance to see me a year ago when I was really on a rant about ufology and ufologists. I was just raising hell and making fun of everybody, and I think they wanted me to do some of that, especially since it's a banquet speech and we're supposed to have a little bit of fun. But I think I'm going to diverge from that plan because, frankly, you know, it's like shooting fish in a barrel for one thing. But there's a lot of it, and there's a lot of bashing ufologists and ufology, and frankly, I think it's too noble a pursuit to go ahead and join in on that stuff. So I'm not going to do so much of that. The only people I'm going to make fun of tonight are me. I am going to talk about ufology in general and some of the goofiness that happens in it, and then sort of delve into the Skinwalker stuff. As John mentioned, we wrote a book called Hunt for the Skinwalker. It's pretty strange stuff. And I wanted to wait until you finish dinner before we really get into that, because there are some video I want to show you of some yummy cow parts that's not going to help your appetite any. You know, this is my 20th year chasing UFOs. 1987 is when I started, and I know there are a lot of people right up front here especially who've been at it much longer than I have, and who know a heck of a lot more about the topic than I do. John, who just introduced me there, told me that he's been involved in it for 11 years now, which means, as far as I can tell, he started when he was 3. And although there are a lot of people who know a lot more about it than I do have some perspective, I think, from a journalism standpoint that other folks might not have, and I think it's relevant to the theme of this year's conference. An estimate of the situation, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. You know, it's the hypothesis. It's been part of ufology since the very beginning. It's still the most widely accepted version and the most widely believed. I think back in 1987 when I conducted my first interviews with the still controversial John Lear and then got sucked into the UFO subject for all time, the ET hypothesis back then was the reigning heavyweight champion and still is. Back then, of course, also I had brown hair. I still had a waistline, and I was blissfully unaware of such minutia as alien implants, abducted fetuses, ET hybrids, not to mention cord rectums among mutilated animals. I had no idea which researchers were complete BS artists, which ones were in on it for the money or for the attention, which ones were fighting with which other ones over which documents or which typeface on the typewriter stand or the DD-214s or other types of documentation. You know, I thought to myself, you know what this field needs is a good investigative reporter to get to the bottom of this, and I'm figuring 6 months tops, I'll have this figured out. A bit over-optimistic, I think. You know, in my hometown, for better or for worse, I'm the UFO reporter. I've done all these other stories on all kinds of other stuff. I don't get to do many UFO reports anymore for a variety of reasons, but you know, for one reason or another, when I started working at KLAS back in 1981, since then, and writing columns and things like that, I've covered such topics as La Cosa Nostra, Israeli mobsters, Asian crime lords, drug dealers, gun runners, bad doctors, corrupt cops, buried treasure, polluters, murders, bikers, fires, pot farmers, crack peddlers, counterfeiters, bank robbers, mad bombers, brothel barons, pornographers, child molesters, casino skimmers, rig slots, scumbags, slime balls, boneheads, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And yet, all those stories, some of them are pretty good. I'm the UFO guy, no matter where I go. I get stopped every single day by people who want to talk to me about flying saucers and ETs. I'm in the grocery store, I'm in a restaurant, I'm in a bar, I'm standing in a men's room, and people come up to me and they want to talk about this stuff. So what's the deal with those UFOs, they ask? Do you really believe that stuff? And for me, it's never been a question of belief. It's a news story. It's a fun and interesting news story, and potentially a story that's bigger than anything else I could ever cover. But belief doesn't enter into it. It's not a religion for me. I'm sure it is a religion for a lot of folks who come to events like this, not this particular one, which is part of what I want to talk about tonight. You know, in my hometown, I said I'm the UFO reporter. I'll bet that in your hometowns, you're the UFO source. You're maybe not the reporter, but you're the go-to guy or gal when the UFO topic comes up. When the O'Hare incident happens, your friends, your family, they come to you and ask for questions about, hey, what's going on? You're the guy who talks about this stuff around the water cooler, maybe even get interviewed around by media folks in your own hometown. You know, people seem to understand that the viewing audience, at least for media folks, as Stan, I think, mentioned earlier tonight, the viewing audience can't get enough of this stuff, which is it's a weird dichotomy. People like me, we do these stories, it's huge ratings, and yet others in the media, other of my colleagues, my competitors, don't want to get anywhere near it, not with a 10-foot pole. For some reason, my journalism colleagues simply can't stand it that I cover this stuff. It drives them crazy. And even though the same guy that broke all these other stories about all other topics, they believe that when I started covering UFOs back in 87, 88, 89, that's when I went off the deep end. I became a nutcase, a wacko. As if somehow I am hurting the credibility of the profession by wasting my time on these subjects. Well, you know, I've taken some lumps over the years, and there are some fun stories about it, and I'm not complaining. It comes with the territory. There was a media columnist in the largest newspaper in Nevada who would write about my initial UFO reports about Area 51, that people were rushing home at night to see them, not because they're interested in ETs, but because he wanted to be there when I finally went bull goose loony on the air, my mouth foaming. The radio DJs, whenever they run out of belch, barf, and fart jokes, they would unload on me about UFOs. I've been the subject of 3 editorial cartoons in the state's largest newspaper. One of them had me with a butterfly net chasing flying saucers. Another one was, the slug was the Marshmallow Head Chronicles, and it had these 2 ET hitmen who'd come to Earth. They just stepped out of their flying saucer, and they're holding their ray guns. They're going to assassinate me, but they're looking at these 2 gasoline pumps, and the one is saying to the other, of course they are Earthmen, but which one is George Knapp? I think making fun of my stout frame or something like that. I did a series of reports about alleged alien abductions and the medical procedures that are allegedly happened during these kinds of incidents, and the columnist wrote, he dubbed me a grand mullah in the Church of Cosmic Proctology. The assumption, again, is that anyone who's involved in this stuff is a wacko. And as we all know, that perception is pretty close to the mark at times. We all have our UFO stories. Today, after I checked into the hotel, I got a call from somebody who wanted to tell me that he talks to trees. Right upstairs, he talks to trees. Now look, I've read Tolkien, I'm hip to Ents. But I told the guy, I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to do with a guy who talks to trees. Not one tree, I mean a whole forest of trees. I've told the story before about this lady when I first started doing the UFO report. She's got to come and see me. She's calling me every day, bugging me, got to tell me something really important. So she shows up at the TV station wearing the skimpiest possible halter top, holding a baby that I later learned was a hybrid, alien-human hybrid, of course. And within 2 minutes of meeting her, she was telling me the most intimate details of her personal sex life, because she said it was while she was engaged in an act out on a front porch with her boyfriend that she first saw the aliens. And eventually they beamed her on, I'm not making one word of this up. Eventually they followed her around, they beamed her up onto a spaceship and told her to put on a bathing suit, and then they told her that in their opinion, she needed breast implants. And she got them. And this was the one part of the story I could believe because there was ample physical evidence staring me in the face. I have received letters from a 75-year-old woman who says she has sexual romps with aliens every time her husband leaves their ranch in California. She even sent me some anatomically correct drawing of alien genitalia. I've been pestered by a millionaire transsexual abductee by the twin brother of Jesus Christ who says aliens are coming and they're really mad, by a man who flew from Australia just to ask me to go out and use my contacts at Area 51 to get the aliens to stop tormenting him at night, which is a true story but a sad one. I went and met with a guy who convinced me that he worked for a government agency and that he still communicates with aliens, and he showed me the device in his backyard. It was an old bird bath with a rusted record rack on top and a disconnected auto headlight. I received all kinds of letters from alleged aliens who say they're watching me. I get recordings and poems. I've had assorted death threats and warnings from so-called government types who say I'm meddling where I don't belong. Of course, it's baloney. Some people are convinced I'm a government agent myself. You know, the problem with the media coverage of these topics is most other journalists don't seem to see beyond the obvious fringe of lunatics and true believers, and they opt for the easy story, that is, make fun of the guy wearing the beanie, or chuckle at the lady with the ET t-shirt, or, you know, pull out all the usual UFO cliches. The problem for us as researchers, sort of leading to where I'm heading here, is that where do you draw the line with folks like this? Where do you say, in my mind, this person's crazy, and this person is not? Because, you know, you might make a mistake. Maybe that guy who talks to trees has a really interesting story, and I've just sort of made up my mind about him without really talking to him at length. That's what PsyCop does. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have open minds about otherwise weird topics. And I'm setting that up because tonight's topic is mighty weird. I do not expect any of you to believe all of this or all of you to believe any of this. If you don't want to believe any of it, I wouldn't blame you a bit because it's strange. It really doesn't fit into any comfortable category. It is a UFO story, but not really. It touches on some poltergeist-type stuff, cryptozoology stuff, witchcraft, government conspiracy, animal mutilations, quantum theory, you name it. If you're expecting tidy explanations about how all this fits together, you won't get them from me. Maybe you can give them to me. The only thing I can say with any certainty after delving into this part of the investigation is that reality, at least for me, isn't what it used to be. There are really two stories to consider regarding this ranch. One is about the ranch itself, where a series of very bizarre events terrorized a family and baffled a community over a long period of time. The second story is about a scientific adventure, an attempt by legitimate, credentialed scientists to investigate the unknown, something that the science establishment all too often avoids. And the study that was undertaken was not perfect by any means, but it was a remarkable undertaking, and probably represents the most intense study of a paranormal hotspot ever. The risks for the research team were very real, and not only from a standpoint of their professions and their professional credibility, but physically. This thing that I'm going to tell you about, this entity or intelligence or whatever it was or is, exerted control over mind and matter in ways that we don't understand. It seemingly has the ability to manipulate people, animals, technology, and maybe space and time themselves. It demonstrated an ability to kill, to dismember, and to terrorize. And it seemingly fed on the fear that its actions generated. And it's tempting to say that this thing is evil, because it did some evil things we would call evil, but evil's sort of in the eye of the beholder. And my guess that it might be a mistake to assign human motives to something that certainly does not appear to be human at all. Dr. Jacques Vallée, next to Stan Friedman, maybe the most important guy to ever study the topic of ufology, once told me in an interview, quote, "I'm going to be greatly disappointed if it turns out that the answer to the UFO mystery is merely that people are traveling here from other planets, that they might be extraterrestrials. They might be extraterrestrials, but that might be only part of the story, one that hints at a far bigger and more mysterious and confusing and perhaps wondrous explanation." Let's get to the ranch. Skinwalker Ranch is the term we're going to use for this place, although it's known by other names. Dr. Colin Kelleher and I wrote a book about the place called Hunt for the Skinwalker, as John mentioned. Before I take you to the ranch, I'm going to show you some video of the Uinta Basin, if we want to roll that footage right now. This basin has been the site of really weird stuff for a long time, for basically as long as anyone can remember. It's in the northeastern corner of Utah. Chances are you've never been there, so we'll show you some pictures of what it looks like. It's a sparsely populated area, stark but beautiful. It's rich in hydrocarbons and fossil deposits. It's enjoying a bit of an oil boom right now. They call it dinosaur country because of all the dinosaur remains up there. 90% of the population is white. The majority of them are devout Mormons, very religious folks. The other 10% are Ute Indians. They live on reservations there, lands that were originally set aside by President Abraham Lincoln. The Utes have always had a presence in the region, even before the reservation. Today, they have their own communities, their own government, their own police force, and although they peacefully coexist and interact with the white population there, the Utes keep to themselves pretty much. They are a proud people. They were fierce warriors back in the 18th and 19th centuries, probably raised a whole lot of hell right in this neck of the woods as well, terrorized and dominated other tribes throughout the Southwest. For some reason, the Uinta Basin has always been a hotspot for strange stuff. The first Spanish explorers to go through there, the missionaries that went through that area in the late 1700s, reporting seeing these weird lights flitting above their campsites. The oral tradition of the Utes date back hundreds of years, many generations, and are filled with stories about encounters with things that we would call UFOs, as well as Sasquatch or Bigfoot, evil spirits, you name it. In modern times, this basin has been a hotbed of UFO activity. That's more than 50 years, easily. Thousands of eyewitnesses, hundreds of unidentified craft, seen over more than a half a century. And not everyone there is willing to talk about these encounters, but it's really pretty damned hard to find someone in the area who hasn't seen one, or who doesn't at least have a family member who's had some kind of a sighting. In 1974, Utah State University professor named Frank Salisbury, some pretty pictures by the way, Frank Salisbury wrote an excellent book called The Utah UFO Display, which detailed this incredible concentration of unidentified aerial objects over this basin. His book was largely based on the case files of a school teacher named Joseph Jr. Hicks, who had personally investigated 400 of the most compelling UFO cases from that area. Just by coincidence, I bought a copy of this book out there today, and right out in your lobby here. I think the inside flap says it cost $7.95 when it came out, and now they're like $65 if you can find one. Anyway, this book, including Joseph Hicks' 400 best cases, included daylight saucer sightings, landings, humanoid occupants, close encounters, missing time, and later mutilated animals. Because he was a science teacher in a small town and was high up in the Mormon church for many, many years, Hicks basically knew everyone who lives in the basin, and everyone trusted him, which is why he was able to get them to tell him things they might never admit to an outsider or a smarty-pants reporter like you-know-who. As his students grew into adulthood, they continued to tell him their UFO stories, often in confidence, and there are so many of them to tell. I spent several hours interviewing Mr. Hicks. Couldn't talk him into appearing on camera, at least not yet, but I heard plenty of compelling stories from others about weird things seen in the skies over the basin. And the objects are similar to the same kind of UFOs that we've all read about, some of whom we've seen, and they're still going on. As I said, though, this isn't really a UFO tale. We've all heard these kinds of stories about the craft that have been seen in the basin. But it was during an interview with Junior Hicks that something else sort of spilled out that sort of caught our attention. He told us that in all this broad basin, where all this UFO activity had been so commonplace for so long, there was one location that really stood out. Even then, it's a particular ranch, essentially an epicenter of weirdness in a sea of weirdness. And why this spot? Hicks told us that according to his friends in the Ute tribe, the ranch was, quote, in the path of the Skinwalker. And when he said it, I got a little chill. I didn't even know what a Skinwalker was at the time. We could talk all day about Native American spiritual beliefs, but here's the abbreviated version. A Skinwalker is a Native American witch, a sorcerer, an evil presence, a shapeshifter who can assume animal form and bewitch the minds of others. Might sound quaint to us, but it's a very serious matter to the Ute tribe even today. They don't talk about it, they won't mention the name, they don't want to use the term in conversation outside the tribe. But we eventually collected some bone-chilling stories about skinwalkers and their abilities, and it's spooky stuff, whether we take it at face value or not. Here's why it relates to this discussion. The Utes were very tough customers, as I mentioned, back in their day. They brutalized other tribes, they enslaved them, they went to war with them. The tribes that got the worst treatment was the Navajo, and the Utes essentially evicted the Navajo from what they consider to be their Garden of Eden. They racked up some pretty bad karma, and they believe that the Navajo, and I'm not asking you to take this at face value again, but they believe that the Navajo put a curse on them, essentially put a skinwalker on them. And that skinwalker has been with them ever since. That is the explanation, their umbrella explanation for whatever the heck it is that's been going on at this particular ranch property that you're going to see in just a second. The title, Hunt for the Skinwalker, is not meant literally. We're not looking for a shape-shifting Native American witch. We're looking for whatever umbrella explanation might work to describe the kinds of things that the Native Americans have been seeing there for a long time. Why don't we run this video? Start the video now. That's the ranch. It's 480 acres, well-watered, a beautiful property. It's surrounded by other similar ranches. In the middle of the picture there, you see a ridge. That's Skinwalker Ridge. It's this giant sandstone ridge that sort of dominates the property. On this side is a well-watered creek. The entire property is well-watered. That's one of the observation posts that was built by NIDS, which I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But it's a beautiful property. In the early purchased by for our purposes. They knew little about the history of this place, except that it had been vacant for 7 years, and the previous owners were not only secretive, but a little paranoid about the place. For example, the previous owners stipulated in the deed that the Gormans, before they do any digging on the property, had to get their permission. Tom Gorman thought, well, that's kind of quaint, that's kind of weird, okay, signed it anyway. Didn't think about it much until later when things got pretty strange. One thing they noticed when they moved into that, keep in mind that that facility right there, that white trailer and a corral, because we're going to come back to that in a little bit. They noticed when they moved into the house that there were thick metal stakes in the ground at both ends of the house, by both of the doors, stakes that had these heavy chains on them, presumably to hang on to big guard dogs that were situated at both doors. And then they noticed that all the doors had bolts on both sides. Not only the doors inside the house, but the doors in bedrooms, closets, things of that sort, as if these people were security crazy. And then an extensive and menu of deeply disturbing things started happening on the property, events that were overt and threatening, possibly dangerous. You know, we'll look at some of the big dramatic events involving UFOs and beings and things like that. But I'll just tell you, it's the little events that really get to me, the little tiny things that raise the goosebumps on my skin. In a nutshell, things started moving around. Inanimate objects somehow become animated. Everyday tools or dishes or possessions seemingly pursued their own agendas. At first, it was simply irritating. Tom Gorman, the dad of the family, was out in the pasture. He's using a post hole digger, sets it right, in front of him, takes a drink of water, wipes his brow, looks around, it's gone. It's gone. They found it 3 weeks later, 75 feet up in a tree, right near where he'd been working. The mom, Ellen, she goes to town, she buys enough groceries for a couple of weeks. She comes back, puts them all on the kitchen table, takes all the groceries out, puts them away in the cabinet, goes into another room for 15, 20 seconds, comes back, all the groceries are back in the bags. The mom would do things like this. In the morning, she'd take a shower every morning. She goes into the bathroom, locks the door. She puts a towel and a hairbrush on the cabinet, takes her shower, comes out, presumably to find the towel there, but many of the times it would be gone. The door's still locked, the towel and the hairbrush are gone. They find them later in odd places, like in a microwave oven or in the freezer. They started seeing shapes and shadows in the house. At night, they'd wake up hearing these heavy footsteps in the hall or the kitchen or right outside their bedroom door. When Tom would get up to investigate, nothing there. Large, dark, humanoid figures would appear at their windows and later at the foot of their beds. The family was rattled, to say the least. They started hearing disembodied voices speaking in a language that they did not recognize. Tom and Ellen are out walking at night. They hear these voices. Sounded like they're coming 10, 15 feet above their head, speaking in this language, but in mocking tones, almost like they're laughing at them. So they'd yell back, voices would be quiet for a minute, and then the laughing starts up again. They couldn't understand the words at all, of course. Again and again, everyday objects like frying pans and spatulas and tools would move, would disappear, reappear, turning up in odd places. On some nights, the entire homestead would be bathed in white light that was coming from above. Other times, it appeared that the beams of light coming right out of the ground, up into the sky. Frequently, the family would hear these loud mechanical noises under their feet, as if there was some kind of a subterranean steel mill or a railroad operating underground. We've interviewed half a dozen other witnesses who say they've heard the same underground rumblings over the years. They also saw a lot of weird animals. I skipped this story, which I sometimes begin with, but on the first day that they moved onto the property, there's this giant wolf. They're unloading their stuff at the corral, and they look across the pasture, and it's huge. And they're thinking to themselves, we didn't know there were wolves in this area. It starts meandering towards them, kind of shy, sheepish. They're thinking, this must be somebody's pet. It must be domesticized. And it walks right up into the family group, and is sort of rubbing up against them. They remember that it had rained that day, and they remember smelling a wet dog kind of a smell. Well, as they're standing there, there's 3 or 4 of their high-end calves are in the corral, and one of them made the unfortunate mistake of sticking its nose out the bar, and this wolf that was standing there among the family leaps at it, grabs